out to the LDBC. It's your boy Fight Critic here to give you guys another video. This video is mostly going to be focused on Jaron Ennis and his brilliant performance against Sergey Lipinets. But I did also wanted to take some time to just give any sort of thoughts regarding any recaps that happened this week in boxing. Obviously, there's not much to be done in terms of just like anything that's been new or developed. We haven't had that much. There has been some movement around Joshua versus Fury, but there's still a lot of vagueness coming from both sides as far as like what's gonna take place. So still kind of sitting back and just watching things unfold. But on in the other divisions, there's not really much going on. I think maybe we might get a couple of interesting fights coming up. I know you got Jose Ramirez versus Josh Taylor. That's a pretty big fight. But nothing else is really like a big thing for us right now. I know like this actually like maybe like a couple minutes ago, they released news that Evander Holyfield is going to be on the same card as Teofimo Lopez for the Triller app, and I was actually kind of interesting. So I got to look up his name later on, but the CEO of Triller did an interview. I think he did it with Lance Pugmire, and he talked about winning the purse bid for Teofimo Lopez's first undisputed title defense. And for their side, what they saw that Top Rank was trying to bully DAZN in order to get the fight. And you saw, both sides kind of just like having, they were too focused on each other and that they didn't see this opportunity. So the CEO of Triller, he said that this was almost like a Hail Mary for him to get done. But the fact that he ended up outbidding them by double kind of tells me that I think it tells me two things. Number one, he's not afraid to put his money where his mouth is. That's the most important part because in today's sport, you have a bunch of promoters who are willing to not put their money where their mouth is. So for him to do that is very commendable. But the second part to it is, I think he still kind of has engaged where the market is in boxing in terms of what promoters are spending for these type of fights. And I think had he had a little bit more knowledge of the boxing economics, I don't think he would have bid that high. I think this bid kind of tells me that I think he maybe had bid a little bit more than what he was expecting to bid. I think his anticipation was these guys were going to bid an enormous amount of money to get this fight, as opposed to the fact that when you looked at the bids at the end of the day, the bids kind of pretty much lined up in terms of the bids from DAZN and ESPN. They look pretty much lined up, very similar to what they would have expected this fight to be like, kind of priced at. So for him to kind of blow their offer out of there, like just blow it out of the water, it kind of tells me like he didn't calculate it as well as he should have, and that's really important because what happens on the next purse bid that they get? Is he going to be able to do the same things? Is he going to have to dial it back? Is he going to have to think about this past purse bid, and does he want to overcommit, undercommit? How does he want to play it? So there's a good amount to be considered there. But let's actually jump into the real meat of this video, which is Jaron Ennis. Jaron Ennis is a bad man, yo. I think for me, I guess it's mostly because I haven't had I haven't paid so much attention into his fights that I haven't seen just how good he is. But I watched this fight and in its entirety. Like I wasn't like somebody just looking at highlights, or because I wasn't really like too invested into it. But for this type of fight and this opponent, Sergey Lipinets is a good fighter. I've watched Sergey Lipinets throughout his career. When a lot of people saw him move, when they saw Mikey Garcia moving up to fight Lipinets, I told people not to completely write him off against Mikey Garcia because I felt that he had enough pop in his punches to make life difficult, Mikey Garcia. And ultimately, when you looked at Mikey fighting at 140 against Lipinets, a lot of us kind of felt like maybe 140 might be a step too far if because it's not that he had trouble with Lipinets, but the Mikey Garcia at 135 did not look like the same Mikey Garcia at 140. And For Lipinets moving up to welterweight, I was kind of concerned because he's not a guy that has a massive pop in his punches. You know, he's a guy that usually likes to set up shots, you know, break his opponent down, and then kind of just like drag them into the deep water, and maybe he gets a late stoppage. He's not really the kind of guy who you expect to just go in there and put a guy down with one punch. But he looked really good against Lamont Peterson. Probably looked as good as anybody's looked against Lamont Peterson, and that's a really big compliment because Lamont Peterson is a no pushover. Um, so for him going into this fight against Ennis, I thought this was a great opportunity for both guys because you got one guy who's a former champion moving up, looking to find the same success in this division, and his only real loss is to one of the best fighters of this era. And then you have Jaron Ennis, who is considered probably to be maybe the best welterweight prospect right now. And to put these two guys in, this is essentially the kind of fight that I don't think many of us would have expected to happen so soon. Either you would have seen Ennis become a world champion and fight a guy of the quality of a Sergey Lipinets, or you would have seen a guy like Lipinets, maybe he loses, you know, 3 or 4 additional fights before you find him in this opportunity to fight Jaron Ennis. So you're getting both guys at a time where they're both still naturally peaking, and when you think about, you know, on both sides of the coin of how well each guy has been able to kind of function, they each have their own, you know, necessary skill set. Now, the one thing I will say about the welterweight division when it comes to Lipinets is he's not standing on his toes as much as he did at 140. Where he would be able to move in and out. He's not really a guy who likes to stand in the same place for too long. And for a guy like Ennis, at least in my opinion, has showed the ability to be the prototypical boxer puncher. But he's a guy who knows how to punch on specific types of angles to exploit his opponent's weakness. And a lot of the times, a lot of that kind of, you know, that formula works when your guy doesn't move as much as you. So the fact that he was getting Lipinets, and you know, I could tell from like at least the first minute and a half of the fight that, you know, Lipinets at this weight, you know, he's just not going to be the same type of guy that he was at 140, where he could move around, he could land shots at these different angles. He was just settling in, trying to see if he can find the opportunity to, you know, hurt his opponent and, you know, maybe get the stoppage. But Ennis was really sharp. He wasn't as accurate with his jab as a lot of us expected, but that him throwing his jab meant, you know, a couple different things to me. But I think the most important part is he has the ability to switch up how his jab looks, and that's a very, very important thing to do when you're, you know, especially a high level fighter, or if you want to be considered a high level fighter. You can't just have a jab to have a jab, and you can't just have a jab looking to land it. You got to use your jab in many, many different ways. So I think the fact that he not only has an effective jab, but also when he switches to the southpaw stance to be effective with the right hand as a jab is very important because, you know, with other guys who use this style, you know, most, you know, popularly for using the style, like, you know, Terence Crawford. Terence Crawford does not rely on the right jab as much, moving into the southpaw stance. Terence Crawford's goal with the southpaw stance is to land the right hook, both to the head and to the body. For Ennis, he was moving to that stance in order to use his jab and then set his jab up with, you know, that the left hook and the left uppercut, which were two really big important punches that kind of helped him break down Lipinets. So I thought it was really, really smart, his game plan. I think also when I looked at, you know, just his overall timing was just extremely well. There were a couple things that I felt that he should have done a little bit better. So one of the things that I felt that he should have done a little bit better was when he fights from the orthodox stance, he moves in and out. He's able to land his punches a little bit crisper, meaning that he doesn't have to, you know, telegraph any of his shots. So when he's fighting from the orthodox stance, you don't see him telegraph any of his punches. You know, he pretty much, you know, uses a very similar stance to it. But when he switches southpaw, you can tell by that right foot that he kind of, you know, uses as a way to kind of set up his shots, that it's almost as if he's kind of like, it's kind of similar to like how Sergey Kovalev, he would telegraph a little bit of his jab just by using his left hand to kind of plan it so that he can land the jab. Whereas with other guys, you know, they can land the jab regardless of their stance. And for Ennis, you kind of see something a little bit similar. He plants his foot to kind of land almost like a power jab from that southpaw stance, and that's just the natural way of a guy whose his dominant arm is his right arm. But what he did really well was the straight left was money. Lipinets couldn't see the left hand coming at any point in time in the southpaw stance. So I think for Ennis, just being able to like be a little bit more versatile in the southpaw stance with your jab is just super important. But I think also another thing that he can kind of work on is when he's in orthodox stance, he doesn't admire his work. He moves in and out. And that's something that's super important because fighters who tend to admire their work ultimately leave these short opportunities for guys to land punches. So when he's in the orthodox stance, he does not admire any of his work. His job is to land shots, move in and out, make it difficult for his opponent to land punches because he keeps keeping these guys to reset consistently. From the southpaw stance, he does admire his work a little bit more. He's kind of looking at his shots and seeing how it makes his opponent feel. And a lot of those times and you saw in certain moments when Lipinets, from the southpaw stance, he was able to use his left hand, even if he took the shot, to get inside and cut some distance and then land like an overhead shot that landed on Ennis. Now, gradually, these punches didn't really affect Ennis in terms of like he didn't seem hurt, he didn't seem bothered. But eventually, at some point, Ennis is gonna fight a guy who's either just as strong or maybe even potentially a little bit stronger than him in the division, and a guy who will be able to study a lot of this and see a lot of these things that he should be improving on. So I think for Ennis, as time kind of goes on, he's going to have to, work on some of these mechanics. But what he did in this fight was absolutely like just great all around. It's a really good performance. I think for me, this win for him, even this will probably be the best one of his career so far. But this is the kind of fight that you don't see many people putting together, at least at this stage, in two fighters who are pretty good. You don't see them fighting this early on in their careers. Usually this fight takes place a little bit later. So I think for them to get this fight, at around this time, I think it was super important. I think it was a great test for Ennis to kind of just show that not only just to put the Chris Van Herden fight behind him, but also to kind of put him in a situation in which like he can beat guys who've won world titles. Like that's a super important thing to do, especially when you're somebody who you're trying to work yourself into a title shot. For Ennis, he fights, in my opinion, it feels a little bit similar to Jamal Charlo. When you look at him, he moves a lot quicker on his feet than Charlo does. But when he's landing combination shots and power shots, it's very, very similar to Charlo. He tries not to exert too much of his energy. He tries to land these short, crisp, hard shots, and he usually sweeps a lot of his punches, something that Charlo does a lot, where you're looking to land the body shots. To sweep the shot, it's almost just like you're doing a little bit of a wind-up, and your center of gravity doesn't change as much. So when you're winding up these shots to land the body punches, the reason why you're doing it is because your expectation is that you're gonna have to move, the elbows and the arms of your opponent out of the way to free up those shots. So rather than trying to land a punch and stick it into a spot that it's being covered, he's looking to sweep the shot so that he can move his opponent and kind of push them in a position to where he can land shots, which is super important. And he's not just settling for just one body shot. He's looking to land 2 to 3 body shots at a time, which is like something that a lot of fighters just they don't have the IQ to do. So for Jaron, this was a great win for him. I think it'll be super important to see what happens, next in the welterweight division. He's a big welterweight in my opinion when just like looking at his frame and his size. I don't think he's quite ready just yet for a world title. I think he might need maybe another 2 or 3 fights, just so that he can continue to kind of work, himself into like this natural, like, position of, beating a guy, making it a stepping stone, beating a guy, making it a stepping stone. So I think that's super good. I think a good fight for Ennis next, maybe a guy like Danny Garcia is probably the next, really good opportunity for him to kind of showcase what he can do next. I don't think there's anybody real else. Maybe a Kell Brook. I think he could probably, definitely like, get a good amount of experience fighting a guy like Kell Brook at this point. I don't think he's quite there and just ready yet for like a Sean Porter or a Keith Thurman. I think if he took if he took another fight, had a similar performance, and I could say that he might be ready for a guy like Keith Thurman or Sean Porter. But I do think that he's working towards the right direction. He kind of knows what he needs to do, and at some point, if not later this year, maybe early next year, he might be up for an eliminator. I have to look at the rankings to kind of see where he's kind of at right now with all four sanction bodies. But I wouldn't be shocked if he's like kind of suited pretty high up on the IBF. Just because like I've looked at a lot of his recent opponents, and when you kind of look at his most recent resume, not only just like Lipinets but the guys like he's fought prior, a lot of that is very similar to what Errol Spence's resume looked like leading up to Kell Brook, where he was beating guys who were either at the very top of the rankings or he was beating guys who were, previously a champion in the division. So those are two things that are really important to do and really important for guys to accomplish when they're moving up. But I think for Ennis, the next step he should be getting another former world champion, or he at least should get a guy who's ranked within the top 15 of the division. I think if he were to get a guy who's ranked top 15, top 10 in the division, I think that'll let us know, if he needs an additional fight or if he's ready to kind of jump into that eliminator, frame of winning a title. But yeah, there's still a lot, for us to kind of, unveil, for him to kind of like show us. I think he still has a lot of things that he's probably continuing to improve on. But this was a great win for him. He's, with every fight, Ennis is making me more and more of a fan. And to beat a guy like I had a lot of really good, you know, I want to say like I've been a fan of Sergey Lipinets as a fighter. So to see Ennis kind of do this and have this good of a performance is super important. It really impresses me. But that's pretty much it for the most part. Let me know what you guys think. Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe to the video. If you guys have any questions, any comments, any concerns, please leave them in the comment section below. If you have any stupid ass shit to say, your comment will be deleted. And most importantly, everybody enjoy your weekend.